Good Monday morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. Our text today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, beginning in verse 23, where Jesus says, "Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." We're returning to our study of Matthew 24, which is a part of a larger teaching often referred to as the Olivet Discourse because it takes place on the Mount of Olives. Remember, Jesus has left the temple grounds. He has said, these buildings, these stones are coming down. And the disciples ask a threefold question of Jesus. They ask Jesus, number one, when will these things be? That is specifically, when will this building, this temple complex, when will it come down? And number two, they ask, what will be the sign of your coming, or the coming of the Son of Man, which is prophesied back in the book of Daniel. And number three, what will be the sign of the end of the age? So those are the three questions which in their mind, no doubt, were all one question. We pointed this out before. They likely did not see these as different and distinct events or things to be plotted on a timeline. They likely rolled this all together into one ball. And Jesus is untangling that. He has said already in this chapter when these things will be. That is, when the temple will be destroyed. He backs up in verse 15. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. That's when these things will be. And he even will go on to say later in the chapter that this will occur in the lifetime of the people listening. So this is very soon. But in this particular section, verses 23 through 28, he is making clear that this is not the same as the coming of the Son of Man. Remember, that's been kind of our point as we've studied this, that Jesus is untangling their question. They just assumed it all rolled together, but Jesus says the coming of the Son of Man will not be rolled up in the destruction of the temple. That's why he says in verse 23, if anyone at this time during the destruction of Jerusalem says, "Look, here is the Christ, there is the Christ," he says, do not believe it. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple is not the coming of the Son of Man. We'll see as we continue our study that the coming of the Son of Man will be delayed, Jesus says in the three parables that follow this teaching. Don't believe it. The coming of the Son of Man and the end of the age are not bundled up in the destruction of the temple. That's why Jesus says in the midst of describing the destruction of Jerusalem, that if someone says, "Here's the Christ," you are not to believe it. The coming of the Christ is not tied up in that. He says, many false Christs, false prophets will arise, perform great signs and wonders. This connects back to verse 10 when he says, and then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. That's verses 10 and 11 of the same chapter. And he circles back to that truth here. False Christs, false prophets will arise. Verse 10 tells us that many will fall away. Now, I want to take important note of verse 10 there when he says many will fall away, because verse 24 of this chapter has been a center of some controversy in Christian thinking over the years. And it really all boils down to these two simple words, if possible. These false prophets, these false Christs will arise. They will perform great signs. They will perform wonders. And the goal of that, or so as, the purpose of them doing this is to lead astray the elect. But Jesus inserts these two words here, if possible. Now, there will be some who on the one hand say, if Jesus meant simply that the elect will be led astray and that it's very possible for the elect to be led astray and to fall away, why insert these two words? Is that not completely misleading if the elect can be led astray? But on the other hand, if it's impossible for the elect to be led astray, then why does Jesus say back in verse 10 that many will fall away? In fact, why does he even say so as to lead astray if that's an impossibility from the outset? And so you really have it from both sides here, and you're kind of wrestling with what's Jesus saying here? Why say, if possible? What's the point? We already know that some will be led astray. Verse 10 tells us. And it seems to me that Jesus is knifing through the heart of our divisions on this subject. Because it is absolutely true on the one hand that many will fall away. They will be led astray. That's not disputable of what Jesus says back in verse 10. But it's also not disputable here that the whole purpose of saying, if possible, is that the elect of God that Jesus is speaking here are outside the power, outside the control, and outside the manipulating influence of the false Christs and false prophets. Yeah, the false Christs and false prophets will have their sheep. They will have those who follow them. But Jesus says the elect, that is those who are heeding the words and teachings of Jesus, they are outside the power. The word possible here in the Greek even refers to power. They are outside the power and influence of the false Christs and false prophets. Do you want to be a Christian who is not led astray by the false Christs and by the false prophets? Do you want to be one of the elect here that Jesus speaks of, that it is outside the realm of possibility for them to be controlled by these false teachers? Then center your life, your thoughts, everything within you. Eat, breathe, drink the words of Jesus. Let them so fill your heart that you can't help but think upon the glory and beauty of his law, of his teaching, of his example, of his sacrifice, of his powerful resurrection. If you are so tethered to the true Christ, then the false Christs have no hope of leading you astray. And so while we must take with great seriousness the warning in verse 10 that there will be many who are led astray, we can come to the confidence that if we connect ourselves to the true Son of God, the true Christ, these false teachers do not have power over us. Verse 25, see, I have told you beforehand. He is warning of us of this. He's warning us of this beforehand so as to prepare us so we don't fall victim to these false teachers. So verse 26, if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness. There was a tradition in early Jewish thought or in first century Jewish thought that the Messiah might appear out in the wilderness. Josephus seems to indicate that that was a thought. There was also a thought that whatever Messiah might be coming would be hidden for a time and then manifest himself later. So if they say he's in the wilderness or he's hiding in the inner rooms and you need to come see him before he's manifest, he says, don't believe it. Don't believe this. And then he tells us in the next two verses what the coming of the Son of Man will be like. He says in verse 27, as the lightning comes from the east, shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. And make sure we hone in on this word, coming of the Son of Man. In this chapter, when Jesus speaks of the coming of the Son, he is referring to the second part of their question. And when he's referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, he is referring to the first part of their question. That is really important to hold in your mind as we read through this text. So here he's referring to the second part, really the second and third part of their question. The coming of the Son of Man and the end of the age. He says it's like lightning coming from the east, shining as far as the west. Well, what is lightning? Number one, lightning is obvious. When you see the lightning in the sky, you know it. You don't miss it. It's there. It's present. It can't be mistaken, like these false Christs and false prophets that can be mistaken. You can't miss it. It's obvious. It can't be confused for anything else. That's the lightning shining up the sky as far as the east and the west. But the second thing about it is that it's fast and it comes without warning. Yeah, maybe we know there's a thunderstorm on the horizon, but when lightning strikes a particular area, there really is no warning. It's fast, it's rapid, it happens, and generally we don't notice it till after it's come and gone. And this is meant to make a distinction between the coming of the Son of Man and the destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem came after many signs, the appearance of the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing where it should not stand. All these signs came before to give you a clue that Jerusalem was about to fall. But the coming of the Son of Man is different. It's like lightning. Yeah, you'll know it when you see it, but you're not going to know what to expect until it happens. That's what the coming of the Son of Man will be like. It will be different than the fall of Jerusalem. Verse 28, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. This is a reference back to the book of Job with a very similar analogy in Job chapter 39, verse 30, alluding to this kind of truth that the birds of prey will find their carcass. And he says that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be obvious. You see vultures circling in the sky. What do you think is down beneath them? Well, it's a dead carcass. And this is just an Aramaic proverb. When you see vultures gathering, you know there's a corpse. The coming of the Son of Man will be like that. It will be like lightning. You won't miss it. It will be completely obvious. That's what verse 27 and verse 28 are indicating. It won't be something hidden. It won't be something secret. You know, there are some who say that Jesus will come in a secret coming of the Son of Man that no one will see. These verses contradict that. These verses say that when Jesus comes, it will be obvious, it will be swift, and it will not be prefixed by a bunch of signs that we can point to current events and say, here it is, it's happening. That is not how it's going to be. All of this connects together in the larger body of teaching going on here in Matthew chapter 24. This larger body of teaching that tells us there will be tribulations coming upon the church. We must stay faithful to the end. There will be false teachers coming, and we must tether ourselves to the Messiah so that we aren't pulled astray by the false messiahs. All of this specifically relates to you and I today. This isn't just some theoretical thing. There are false Christs. There are false prophets teaching false doctrine today. And they will lead many astray. But if you tether yourself to the Word of God, they have no power over you. That's why we begin in the Word, to tether ourselves to the Word of God throughout this day. And it's my hope that just as you have begun today in the Word of God, you will live out today in the Word of God.